When I think back to that afternoon, it still feels like stepping into a moment that was never supposed to happen. My name is Amir, and for as long as I can remember, my closest companion has been a boy named Samir. We grew up on the same street, shared secrets in hushed whispers, and borrowed each other's laughter when life grew dull. That day, when I walked up the path to his house, I expected nothing more than another lazy evening together, talking, playing video games, or perhaps discussing the usual fragments of teenage restlessness. But when I knocked on the door and waited, the one who answered wasn't Samir. It was his father, Mr. Rahman. I had seen him countless times before, but never like this, never with the eyes of someone suddenly aware of silence and distance. He stood tall, his frame imposing yet calm, his voice carrying a depth that made even the simplest words linger. "Samir isn't home right now," he said, his tone steady, but his gaze holding me for a fraction longer than expected. "But you can wait if you'd like." I hesitated. A part of me considered leaving, but another part, curious and strangely unsettled, stepped inside. The house was quiet, unusually so, as though every corner was holding its breath. Mr. Rahman led me to the living room. He didn't rush. His movements were deliberate, measured, as though he was aware of being observed. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of his presence even from across the room. He asked about school, about my plans, about things that fathers often ask out of courtesy. Yet there was something different in the way he listened, as if every word I spoke mattered more than it should. The conversation meandered, never urgent, but never dull. He spoke about his own youth, about choices made and regrets carried, about how quickly time escapes when you aren't paying attention. His words weren't meant to charm, but they settled in my mind like seeds taking root. I realized that for the first time, I wasn't seeing Samir's father as merely a figure of authority. I was seeing him as a man complex, thoughtful, and quietly magnetic. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting long shadows on the carpet. I noticed the details I had never allowed myself to notice before. The lines etched by experience on his face, the calm steadiness of his voice, the intensity in his eyes when they met mine. I felt caught in a strange space between familiarity and strangeness. I told myself it was nothing, that I was simply imagining things, that the house's silence was playing tricks on me. But each passing moment carried a charge, subtle but undeniable. When his hand brushed mine while passing a glass of water, it was innocent, accidental, yet it lingered in my thoughts longer than it should have. I tried to remind myself of Samir. He was my friend, someone I trusted, someone whose home I had entered 1,000 times before without a second thought. Yet now, everything felt different. The very walls of the house seemed to echo with a possibility I hadn't dared consider. Mr. Rahman leaned back in his chair, studying me with a half-smile that revealed nothing and suggested everything. "You've grown a lot these past years," he said quietly. "Sometimes I forget how quickly time moves." I nodded, unsure how to respond. My chest tightened with a mix of unease and anticipation. I could sense that something was shifting, something small, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change the course of the day. The air between us grew heavier, not with words but with the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that demanded acknowledgement, that made the heart race and the mind search for answers. I glanced at the door, half expecting Samir to walk in at any moment, but it remained closed. Instead, it was just the two of us, an unspoken understanding settling quietly between us. By the time the clock ticked toward evening, I knew I had crossed into unfamiliar territory. I hadn't done anything, yet everything felt different. My friendship, my loyalty, my own sense of self, all seemed to stand at the edge of something forbidden. And in that moment, as Mr. Rahman's gaze lingered on me once more, I realized this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The air in the living room seemed to thicken as the evening crept closer. Outside, the faint hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog reached us through the walls, but inside, the silence carried its own weight. I shifted uneasily on the couch, aware of every movement, every glance. Mr. Rahman sat across from me, his posture relaxed, yet his eyes never strayed too far from mine. He poured himself tea, the simple act strangely deliberate, as though even the clink of the spoon against the cup had meaning. "You don't visit as often these days," he remarked. His tone was casual, but the question beneath the statement lingered. "I've been busy," I replied quickly, though I wasn't sure with what. School, perhaps, or life in general. The truth was that I hadn't noticed how much time had passed. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Busy is good, but sometimes we forget what we actually want." The words hung between us, subtle yet charged. I sipped the tea he offered, the warmth spreading through me, though it did little to settle the unease tightening in my chest. Every second stretched longer than it should, as if the clock itself had slowed to watch us. I thought again of Samir. His absence was like a shadow in the room, a reminder that I was sitting here with someone I was not meant to feel drawn to. But the more I tried to push that thought away, the more it returned, sharper, heavier, impossible to ignore. Mr. Rahman leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "Amir," he said, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial, "you've always been different. Thoughtful. You notice things most people don't." His words caught me off guard. Compliments from adults usually felt perfunctory, polite acknowledgments of effort. But this was different. It wasn't about grades or manners or responsibility. It was about me, how I thought, how I saw the world. And hearing it from him made my chest tighten with something I didn't fully understand. I looked down, hoping the moment would pass, but it didn't. The silence returned, heavier now, filled with everything unsaid. I could feel his eyes on me, and against my better judgment, I let mine meet his again. There was no malice in his gaze, no aggression, just a quiet intensity, a certainty that unsettled me more than anger ever could. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a casual conversation filling the void of Samir's absence. It was deliberate, a slow unraveling of boundaries I hadn't even known were fragile. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly. The question startled me. My instinct was to answer yes. It seemed the polite thing to say. But my voice caught in my throat, and instead of words, I gave a hesitant nod. He smiled faintly, as though satisfied with an answer I hadn't spoken aloud. "Good," he murmured. The room felt smaller then, the space between us shrinking not by steps but by unspoken agreement. I realized I had choices in that moment. To leave, to excuse myself, to wait for Samir outside until he returned. Yet I stayed. Something stronger than reason kept me rooted there, my heart racing, my thoughts clouded. The conversation drifted again, this time to safer ground. Books, music, the passing of seasons, but beneath every sentence the tension remained. Every pause felt like an invitation. Every look carried the weight of what had not yet been acknowledged. As the evening light faded, Mr. Rahman stood and drew the curtains closed, shutting out the last of the sun. The room was dim now, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. It felt private, intimate, as though the outside world had been deliberately excluded. I could sense the line we were approaching, though it remained invisible, unspoken. My loyalty to Samir, my respect for his family, my own sense of right and wrong, they all pressed heavily on me. And yet, in the quiet hum of that enclosed space, I found myself wanting to step closer to see what lay beyond that line. When he finally sat back down, closer than before, I didn't move away. Instead, I stayed, suspended between fear and anticipation, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The sound of the clock on the wall broke the silence, its steady ticking reminding me that time was still moving, even if it felt like the world had paused for us. And as I sat there, caught in the stillness of that moment, I knew the story was no longer about waiting for Samir. It was about what I was willing to risk in his absence. The lamp in the corner buzzed faintly, its glow stretching shadows across the floor. I remember thinking how strange it felt that such an ordinary object could illuminate a moment so extraordinary, one that would quietly alter everything I believed I knew. When I finally rose from the couch, it wasn't because I wanted to leave, it was because I knew I couldn't stay. My heartbeat was uneven, caught between exhilaration and unease. Mr. Rahman watched me with the same calm, composure he had held all evening, as though he had known from the start how this day would unfold. "Samir will be back soon," he said, his voice steady, almost casual. The reminder of my friend's name struck me harder than expected, grounding me in a reality I had almost let slip away. I nodded, but words failed me. My throat felt dry, my mind restless. I wasn't sure if I should thank him for the tea, for the conversation, or for something I didn't dare put into words. Instead, I muttered a faint goodbye and walked toward the door, each step heavy with a weight I couldn't define. Outside, the evening air was cool, carrying the distant sounds of life, continuing as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had. I stood there for a moment, looking up at the house I had entered so many times before, and realized it no longer felt the same. It held a secret now, a secret only two people shared, one that bound us in silence. In the days that followed, I saw Samir as often as I used to. He laughed the same way, spoke to me with the same trust, and never once suspected that something unspoken had settled between me and his father. Each time I entered their home, my chest tightened, not with fear of being discovered, but with the memory of that suspended moment when boundaries blurred. Mr. Rahman, for his part, acted as though nothing had happened. He greeted me politely, asked about school, made small talk in the kitchen. Yet, in those brief moments when our eyes met, there was always something else, an echo of the silence we had shared, a reminder that we had crossed into dangerous territory. It wasn't love, at least not the kind I had read about in books or seen in films. It wasn't even friendship. It was something more fragile, more forbidden, a connection born out of curiosity, secrecy, and the thrill of stepping too close to the edge. At night, I replayed it all in my mind, trying to make sense of what it meant. Was it a mistake? Was it betrayal? Or was it simply a story of two people who found themselves colliding in a moment that neither could fully explain? The guilt was real, though. Every time Samir smiled at me, every time he trusted me with his thoughts, I felt it pressing harder against my chest. I told myself it was nothing, that no real harm had been done, yet the weight remained. Secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer they are carried, and this one was no exception. Weeks turned into months, and life continued, at least on the surface. Samir never knew, and Mr. Rahman never spoke of it again. But I knew, and knowing changed me. It made me cautious, made me aware of how fragile trust can be, how quickly loyalty can bend under the pressure of temptation. Sometimes when I walked past their house, I would glance at the window of the living room and remember the stillness of that evening. The sound of the clock ticking, the pull of a gaze that said more than words ever could. And though nothing more happened, the memory itself was enough to remind me that one decision, one choice to stay when I could have left, had altered the way I saw both myself and the people closest to me. The story never reached its loud conclusion. There was no confrontation, no discovery, no dramatic ending. Instead, it settled quietly into my life, like a shadow that stretches longer with the fading sun. A reminder of what it means to want, to risk, to step too close to something forbidden, and to carry that silence forward unseen by the world. And so, whenever I think of that day, I don't think of what was said or done. I think of what was left unspoken, because sometimes it is the silence that tells the truest story of all.